and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have a very special guest named Kate, and she is back with us for a second time. And today she is going to talk to us about why she has finally decided to walk away from the classroom for good. And so, Kate, I'm just kind of wondering, was there any event or anything this year that happened where you just thought, I am done with this? This is going to be the last year I'm teaching?
Yeah. So I had been kind of tossing around the idea of leaving for a while. In fact, I was going to quit at my second year because I just ended the year exhausted and miserable. But my mother, who was a teacher before me, said the third year's where things clicked. Give it a third year, see if it works. Other teachers repeated that advice. So I said, I'll take this third year, I'll see where things go. And if it's good, I'll stay. And honestly, it actually started out really good. I loved teaching at the beginning of my third year, but over the year, it started to degrade a little. And things built up. And the explosive thing that just made me go, no, there's no way I'm sticking around after this, was actually something that happened to my mentor teacher. So she teaches wood workshop. She used to teach art classes. They lost their woodshop teacher, and she's this super cool woodworking artist. So she volunteered to take it over. I came in and took her place in like doing the fine arts. And so I really look up to her and admire her. She's this amazing teacher, incredibly safe, incredibly disciplined, like honestly, the most amazing teacher in the world. And she had a student stick an air compressor up another student's butt. So this was Teacher Appreciation Week. And so for the entire week of Teacher Appreciation, there was a parent screaming, harassing, sending threatening emails, and directly telling my mentor teacher that she was going to be fired. He would sue her, he would ruin her life. And the district was in a panic. They were like, it was told to her in kind of the rush and the chaos that she would have to take full responsibility for what happened. And so you can imagine, it's supposed to be the 1 week where you are appreciated for your work, and you're literally, your whole life is being threatened because two kids decided to mess around and do something really impulsive and dumb. And basically after that, I was like, there's no way I'm hanging my hat on 12-year-olds not doing stupid things. Like, there's so many chances of things to go wrong. I've had students slice open their hands and have to go to the ER because they don't listen to you when you tell them to do something. My last day, I literally had said, all right, everyone put the spray bottles away. You're going to spray someone in the eye, because they were spraying each other with the cleaning chemicals. And not even a moment later, this kid comes crying to me because he got sprayed in the eye. And then that was a whole visit to the eye doctor for him. His parents had to leave their jobs to go pick him up. So, I mean, in any class, there's a risk, but maybe it's especially in classes like art or gym or places where kids can get hurt. The idea that like your whole career and your whole livelihood is hanging on these kids not doing dangerous or crazy things when they have no impulse control just seems totally unfair. And I just realized I could not live that way. I don't want to live that way, hanging my hat on 12-year-old boys not sticking things up each other butts. So I handed in my resignation and I left.
Wow, that is really crazy. That's just so much to take in, honestly, because when you first said it, it kind of sounded goofy. But when I really thought about it, it's like, oh my gosh, that one kid really assaulted another kid. And you're so right. It's like when kids are as wild and disobedient as they are these days, something can happen so crazy in a split second. And with our culture, everything is a lawsuit on the one hand. So they're giving all of the responsibility for kids' behavior to the teacher. But then on the other hand, we're not allowed to do anything to so-called discipline kids. If a teacher so much as raises their voice a little bit, then that teacher is at risk of getting fired. So it really is a no-win situation when they're saying you have to be responsible for everything that happens under your roof. But oh, by the way, there's nothing you can really do to stop these kids. So that is really, really crazy when I think about it.
Yeah. Well, and I like, not to badmouth this parent, because I understand being concerned about your kid. Like, if that kid had been genuinely hurt, what a horrible thing to happen. But I think it's telling that your first reaction is to go and antagonize the teacher and not to immediately press charges against the child who did this to your child. And I think it just speaks to sort of the cultural thing where we put all the responsibility on teachers, when why aren't we talking about like parents teaching boys not to touch other boys or do crazy things that they shouldn't do, or the kid for doing something that he had been told could cause harm, because they're told, like, do not put this near your, or excuse me, near your orifices, this is dangerous, you like, it doesn't go near your face or your ears, your mouth, to then go, oh well, I'll just stick it up someone else's butthole. So there is kind of this culture of it's all on the teacher. And I think that shows throughout the entire system. I mean, teachers right now are counselors, they're parents, they're investigators, they're admin, they're everything under the sun. They're this kind of super powered workhorse. And with that comes way too much responsibility for the just widespread stuff that we take on. I mean, if you put 30 plus kids in a wood workshop, like my mentor, she's amazing that she can even keep all those kids from cutting their fingers off, because the amount of times she tells me stories of kids doing just the dumbest things, like, and not even like, I'm not trying to say kids are dumb, but just they're not thinking, they're like, oh, it won't happen to me, I will put my finger next to the saw blade, and she has to catch that and stop it right away, and she's amazing at it. But with even 25 kids in that classroom, what are the odds that something bad won't happen? And, why don't we have a greater social understanding that she can't stop it all the time?
Absolutely. And I'm kind of curious, did you have any situations yourself with students this year where they were being defiant or disrespectful? How did that go for you this year?
Oh yeah. I had a class, right, a student who was quite a bit bigger than maybe like a head taller, twice as tall as me. Um, Very defiant. And there was a point where he was trying to walk out of the classroom. He hadn't cleaned his spot. It was just putting away some like pencils and things, very low key. And he wanted to get to lunch. He didn't like being held back to clean up his stuff, but I wasn't going to let him get away with it. So he got right up in my face and screamed at me. And he had his fist clenched like he might have come up and hit me. He did not. But to have someone scream in your face, like, you knock it off, like, you leave me alone, get out of my way, it's terrifying. And these are kids with low impulse control. Socially, that we're seeing so much less control. And if he had been much angrier, I'm sure he would have taken a swing at me. And to have that happen over just the smallest things. A lot of times there's accidents in the art room, like that kid who sliced open his hand. I had told them, like, we're doing carving lino prints, which is this little linoleum block, and they have carvers and they carve it out and then we print it. He held it in his hand, and I had said, like, do this on the table and like push away from you, and he picked it up in his hand and he was like grinding into it, and it went through the block and into his hand. Accidents like that happen. But there's been so many times over the years where kids have just lost their cool. I've had a fight every year. I call it my yearly fight. If the yearly fight didn't happen, it wasn't a year of teaching. Like, I've had kids where one moment they're fine, they're normal, they're just kind of washing stuff, they're goofing around. And the next thing I knew, they were on the floor just battering each other. And I'm talking like swinging as hard as they can, like totally blacked out, red-eyed angry. And so to have those situations, it's terrifying. Like, you don't know what to do, you can't touch them, you don't want to get in between them and get hurt yourself. You have a whole other class of students that you're trying to deal with, and they're watching you get screamed at, cussed out, they're watching you panic while you try and break up a fight and keep everyone safe, and they're really internalizing that. um, I want to say I've heard it mentioned before, but I don't know if we talk about how much that teaches kids to tolerate seeing and experiencing abusive relationships. Because these really are abusive situations. When, a kid gets up in your face and screams at you for asking them to come back and take care of their supplies, for the other kids to watch that, they're internalizing watching other people abuse like people around them, and see explosive things and see that as normal. And that's not healthy for them. They should be able to see that getting dealt with, and should see that there's repercussions for that. They shouldn't see that to be safe you just take what someone does to you and you just sort of internalize it. So it's not just scary for you as a teacher, but you feel like you're almost enabling kids growing up thinking that it's normal to be hurt, and yelled at and fearful of explosive people in their lives. So It's really tough.
Yeah, that is such a good point. I was actually just kind of having this mild debate with somebody in the comment section of one of my videos because people love to say, oh, you teachers are so soft. You should have known about this when you signed up for the job. And that just drives me crazy because no other profession really do you sign up to have verbal abuse and intimidation and harassment and even assault as just a part of your daily job. And I truly believe that there was a time that this wasn't normal. I mean, even, I'm an older millennial. This wasn't the case when I was going to school, at least. And I know that there's other parts of the world that can have a one room schoolhouse with 100 kids and one teacher, and everybody can somehow behave. So it's like people believe that, that this is just such a normal situation and that teachers need to toughen up and deal with it. But you're absolutely right. It's just in our culture, for whatever reason, horrible behavior has been normalized to such a degree where we think that certain jobs just have to tolerate it. And that is so disturbing.
Yeah. Well, when I was doing research for my thesis, I think this could be wrong now, or I could be quoting it wrong because it's been a little bit since I've done it. But I think elementary school teachers were up there among the most likely professions to be assaulted in. And granted, you're talking little kids, so the assaults hopefully are not that bad. But why on earth is taking care of little children one of the most violent careers that a person can go into? I mean, that's just devastating. And not, again, not just for us, for other little kids. I mean, I really can't express how scared I would be to send my child to school and have them watch people be abused on the daily by other children. I mean, first of all, for them to integrate that they need to accommodate explosive and violent children so that they stay safe, and that's like internalized in them, but then also to see that it's okay to say horrible things and do horrible things to adults because you're upset. I don't want them to see that or experience that. And I don't want anyone's children to see or experience that. So it's a little disappointing when people just say that this is a problem teachers need to suck it up with. And we don't talk about, like, number one, it's not good. It's happening to teachers and it shouldn't be okay. But it's happening to your kids too in the classroom. They're seeing and internalizing this, and it's going to have an effect on them to grow up around violent, abusive, explosive relationships.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I'm just curious, is there anything in particular that you think is causing this problem or feeding this problem that maybe we didn't have it in the past, or something that's changed that's making the situation worse?
Yeah. I think one of the really tough things is that I'm not well educated in this area, but I was learning a little bit about it over the past couple of weeks, and I really agree with it. And there was someone who was kind of talking about how mothers tend to create regulation of emotions, and fathers tend to create regulation of impulses. And I think we're seeing just the absence of both mothers and fathers now. A lot of kids don't have any impulse control, and more they don't have a lot of emotional kind of regulation either. And I think a lot of it stems from just the fact that parents aren't parenting. They're not present. Even if they're there and they're available to their kids, they're distant. They're not actively involved. They're not engaged. And a lot of that's just life right now. I mean, a lot of parents are two income households and they can't survive without those two incomes. But then they get home and they're tired and they've worked all day and they're not necessarily excited to engage with their children. So their children are at daycare all day, and then they get home and they give them an iPad, and the kid just sits on the iPad. And I think it's just the breakdown of being present and available for our children. Like, I joke about it. I have a kid. He was a good sport. I called him iPad kid all year, as just as a joke, and he thought it was funny. He'd make fun of me too. But they really are iPad kids. They're very impulsive. They don't know how to regulate. They're addicted to their screens, and they're going through withdrawal at school. Whenever you take that screen away from them, they immediately experience and show all the symptoms of withdrawal. So it's sort of this perfect storm of parents either not being able to parent as much as would benefit children, or they're just not interested in it. They don't really like the children they created, and it's someone else's problem. They're not going to deal with it. And then the drug of choice is just technology. For both adults and parents, or both adults and kids. I mean, I can think of 100 adults I know who come home and immediately jump on their gaming equipment or their phones, me included. And I mean, when you start thinking about having kids, like that's something I have to start thinking about now is how am I going to cope when I don't feel good if it's not healthy to just pick up my phone and ignore my child? Things like that. So yeah, I mean, I'm not a great expert, but I definitely think that it's a lot of tech issues, a lot of withdrawal from their addictions, and then just parents not being present enough in their kids' lives to help them develop these important coping skills they need.
Yeah, I totally agree with you 100%. And I think the scary thing too is what the kids are watching when they're on their iPads and when they're on their phones. Because I remember even years ago, the kids would be watching, the TVMA Netflix series when they were in fourth grade or fifth grade. And so I think, and then on top of that, just social media. And I think hopefully it's calmed down a little bit. But I remember when it was a huge trend for kids to like destroy bathrooms in their schools or to try to hit a teacher. And so I think it's just kind of the worst of both worlds. They're seeing fictionalized violence normalized. And then on top of that, they're seeing their peers in other parts of the country and the world normalizing really deviant, awful behavior. And then they have the reinforcement of being in the so called real world, but not experiencing real world consequences. And so it's just like this horrible amalgamation of all of these forces that are absolutely creating borderline feral children. I hate to say it, but it's just the way that kids are behaving is crazy. And it's weird to me too, because even just being in public and seeing how people's kids behave, I feel like when I was growing up, if a kid started throwing a tantrum, an adult would be on the situation immediately, trying to calm and soothe the child down or removing them from the situation. But I'm seeing now more and more, it's almost like parents are ignoring it, or they think it's funny and cute, or they just don't see the problem. They have a mentality that, oh, kids will be kids. What do you really want them to do? And so it's really kind of odd to see in real time things fall apart so badly.
Yeah. Yeah, and interestingly enough, we have a new trend right now. Thank goodness the school year's over. Because the new trend was to stick graphite into Chromebooks because it starts a fire. And there's
What?
been schools burning, like I've just seen it all over the news of schools on fire because these kids are sticking graphite into these Chromebooks to start fires. And we had it happen at our school. We caught it early enough. We had smoking Chromebooks. We had kids sticking things into outlets. I think the pod right next door to mine had a whole like wall of outlets go out because some kid like stuck a toothpick in there or something. So really destructive things. And what's interesting is they're seeing this on the internet and they're seeing it go viral. But the kids are not who post these videos, they're probably not posting the part where they now owe tens of thousands of dollars in damages, where their parents' lives are devastated because now the parent is being held responsible, where people are getting sued, they're going to jail, all these different things. And I really try and push that with my students that the world on the internet is so heavily edited. You're seeing like a clip out of the entire universe of consequences. And they usually don't get it. But one of the scary things is how many what they call lol cows go viral and that they enjoy on the internet. They're not maybe empathetic enough to be uncomfortable seeing mentally ill people destroy their lives on the internet and do degrading, disgusting, embarrassing, humiliating, antisocial activities. They just think it's funny and they see these people going viral for it and getting a ton of views and being popular, and they don't see or experience the sort of reaction we have as kind of fully functioning adults, where we feel sick and miserable for that person, where we pity them. And so one of the interesting things I think probably deserves more of a look at in life is how many kids are not picking up important empathy skills because all they're seeing is, hey, that really mentally ill person who's degrading themselves on the internet went viral, and they never develop the sense that that's really wrong, that that person's getting exploited, they're having a mental breakdown on the internet for views for other people to enjoy. and how that affects their behavior. If they're, because in my case, there were things I thought were funny as a kid that I saw on YouTube, and my mom would walk in and she'd say, "Oh, that's so sad," or "Oh, that's so horrible, that poor person." And it would kick in that moment of, "Oh, like this is something to pity," or it was a teaching moment to be taught to care for those kinds of people. And if kids are consuming all this on the internet and there's no parent to guide them or to help them understand, like, hey, that person's in a mental crisis. It's not normal to be on the internet doing this, weird thing. They just develop this sense that, oh, that's cool, it's funny, it gets attention, and then they replicate that behavior out in real life. And so I'd be interested to know how many of these kind of lol cow figures that students are starting to mirror um, are actually causing a lot of problems in how kids throw temper tantrums, how they behave, um, because there's no longer like a kind of a filter or an empathy for people for that stuff. I don't know if that makes sense, but I had a student who was talking to me about this person called Lovely Peaches, who, don't look her up. It's kind of horrific. Definitely someone in a mental health crisis who's displayed on the internet, but they think she's so funny and they'll act like her. And it's interesting to sit there and go, do you know that this is someone who's really unwell? And you're making fun of her, and you're taking advantage of her when she, if we're in her right mind, probably would not want you to, and goes right over their heads. And I think it's probably affecting the way they act in real life quite a bit. And that's probably like where a lot of this sort of feral behavior comes from, is from thinking it's funny, it's interesting, it'll get me attention, and not understanding that it stems from being mentally and physically unwell.
Yeah, definitely. And can I ask you to clarify? Did you say law cal? I don't know what that is. Can you
Oh
tell me
yeah,
what that is?
it's LOL cow. So they call
Oh,
them lol cows, and it's basically people who on the internet, usually they're um, like they have some sort of mental disability, and they will crash out and do crazy things, super degrading, humiliating things, and they do them often because they don't have really the faculties to stop themselves or to emotionally regulate, and they're just whole kind of humiliation is on the internet for people to make fun of and enjoy.
mm,
So when you have a lot of empathy, like, it's, to some sense, it's kind of absurd and ridiculous, and you can't help but laugh. But I think for a lot of functioning adults, it's a little bit like watching a wreckage. So you're sort of horrified the whole time, but kids don't get that same thing, from what I can tell. At least in middle school, to them, it is just all spectacle, and there's no sense of sorrow or concern for the people involved.
wow. It's so ironic too, because I feel like the whole concept of social emotional learning has been such a push and such a thing that people have said we need to have this in the classroom. But I feel like there's the least amount of empathy I've ever seen. And I just wonder how that all pans out. I wonder if it's because, like you said, the kids don't have a foundation maybe of morality and values that has been reinforced since childhood. So maybe by the time somebody, like some guidance counselor, tries to sit them in a circle and say, let's talk about our feelings, the kids think that's a joke too, because they have no framework or grid for actual empathy. It's kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, I think we're really in trying to keep our schools functioning and all the funding stuff, we're shaving off natural social emotional learning, because we're putting kids in reading and math for hours on end. And those things are good. I'm not saying they're bad or anything, but we're putting them for the hours on end. We're cutting down their playtime. Just by the nature of needing to learn, there's less socialization time. We're cutting arts, we're cutting music, all these different things, in this attempt to kind of boost a lot of our scores on tests. We're cutting out all the social emotional learning that should be happening naturally within a school setting. And probably the best you're ever going to get is from a happy, healthy home, but probably second best is from the community you create at school. And like in our case, they continue to push social emotional learning. They're hiring people, specialists from outside, to kind of run these social emotional things, but then they cut art and music. And the kids are not getting some of the most beneficial, natural social emotional learning they'll get in their lives at a young age, because, well, they need more time in math. They're not doing well in math, so we're just going to give them 2 extra hours of math and they'll get art for 30 minutes a week, or something like that. So it's kind of frustrating as someone who teaches a class that is built on the idea of discussion and kind of creative problem solving and intuitive kind of emotion, to have my class continually like undermined and undervalued, while we'll bring in some sort of artificial specialist to sit kids in a circle where they're just going to make fun of it. I'm the sneaky version of social emotional. They don't realize that by coming to my class that they are getting those sorts of skills. They just think they're having fun and they don't realize what they've built. But then when you sit them down in a circle and you're overly intentional, they're just, yeah, they make fun of it. It's ridiculous to them. So we're taking out what's good and giving them like this artificial version of it in the schools quite a bit. And then we're like, wow, why do we have all these problems?
Yeah. Yeah. And it just made me think too. I think without real consequences and the worst behaved children being dealt with and sometimes removed if they can't be rehabilitated, so to speak, it's like I think the kids that would be impacted by those kind of lessons and conversations, it's just all overshadowed by the kids with terrible behavior that are bullies. Because I think the sad news is some kids, for whatever reason, hopefully they get better one day, but some kids, for whatever reason, at the development that they are at, no amount of talking to them is going to change their behavior. No amount of, at this place that they're in, trying to explain empathy is going to impact their behavior. The only thing that would stop them is somewhat painful consequences, and that would actually stop the behavior enough for them to at least let other people learn and enjoy what's happening in the classroom. And so I just think what happens when there's no consequences is bullies start to rule things and the kids know it. And that kind of stomps out natural joy and curiosity and love of learning because everybody's attention, even subconsciously, is focused in on the biggest bullies, the worst behaved kids, and then they don't want to get made fun of for doing the right thing. So then kids start to copy the behavior of the worst students at the time, and before you know it, that becomes the culture of the building, making fun of things, lighting things on fire, trying to hurt people, making fun of and intimidating the teacher. That can quickly become the culture of a whole school if people don't stop kind of the pods of that behavior quickly and swiftly and promptly and let their parents know if your child wants to be in a normal atmosphere, they need to exhibit normal behavior. And if you won't do it, then it's not going to be our problem. Like if schools have the attitude that we are not going to let this behavior reign in our school, if you let them act like that at home, that's one thing, but it's not happening within these four walls. But unfortunately now, because of the way parents will sue the school over anything, it's like all of these administrators are afraid. So they're trying to come up with all of these crutches, so to speak, that doesn't deal with the real problem, and it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because to be a good teacher, you have to differentiate your learning. They talk about you have kinetic learners, you have audio visual learners, all different things. But suddenly we lose that when it comes to these social emotional things. Some kids are not going to learn by being told don't touch the stove. They need to touch it and feel what it feels like to touch the stove. And like I have a kid, I didn't do this. I have a very brave coworker. He's our like our in-school suspension guy. He found one of my students who's a chronic liar. He'll lie about things and then sneak out. And he found him. He said, "No one's ever going to hire you. You will be a jobless loser because you're going to lie about coming into work." And he let the kid have it. And that kid needed to hear it, but he didn't care. That didn't change anything. But this summer, when he goes to get a job and he can't show up for any of his jobs, he sneaks away. He lies to his boss. He's going to find out then. And even if it didn't, like, he'll learn from that and he'll remember what the other teacher said to him, where he said, you're failing because you're a liar. And that hopefully will click in. But I mean, he doesn't care. Even when you verbalize the consequences that will come, it's meaningless to him because it doesn't exist in the here and now. Nothing's happened to him now except that he sits in ISS for sneaking out of class and lying to teachers all the time. But if the consequences came sooner and there were real consequences real soon, that would click much sooner than when he's 16 and he can't get his car because he can't get a job and pay for it. So we think that we're saving these kids these horrible experiences, and that we're equalizing and creating like an equitable environment by reducing consequences, because some kids naturally are set up in life poorly and hit more consequences. But the problem is that it gives them less ability to learn the way it's helpful for them to learn and course correct early before they're taken away so many opportunities. I think there's probably a good half of the population of my middle school that I worked at who, if they had more severe consequences in elementary school for what's going on in their lives, would be rock stars in middle school. But as it is, they just get passed along from elementary and middle school. And then once they hit high school, they're in high school for 7 to 10 years, because that's when it finally hits that, hey, if you don't pass your classes, you don't graduate. And suddenly we have this like pool of kids who were just no consequence, no consequence, no consequence. And then suddenly one day consequences hit. And now when it's later in life, they have to suddenly recollect, reconfigure, and try and move forward. If that had happened in elementary school, then they wouldn't be stuck in high school with no GED for so long, you know? But here we are, we're trying to be equitable, but what we're really just doing is kind of undermining students and taking away the opportunity to fix things early.
Oh my goodness. I agree 100%. And I think too, it's like kids that come from a tough home environment. I think something that could be more of a legitimate equalizer would be going to school and getting a great education. And also, like you were talking about earlier, getting socialization that maybe they're not seeing at home. And so I just agree so much. I think our little personalities are being molded when we're small, and I think the problem is if somebody has spent 18 or 19 years of their life learning how to be a liar, a manipulator, learning how to steal, learning how to bully other people, it's like almost a lot of those traits are cemented at that point. But it's like if somebody was dealing with those seeds of the behavior when they were young, and when they learn something as simple as, hey, if you don't turn in your homework, you have to sit there and do it at recess. I remember that was my biggest battle as an elementary teacher, is they got into the thing of you can't take recess, you can't take class parties, you can't take field trips, you have to give the same reward to everyone. And it was just so ridiculous because that was the only leverage I had as a teacher. And so I just remember thinking so strongly that these kids are learning that you have one student in the classroom that's like a model citizen and getting all A's, and you have one, student in the class that's throwing desks, screaming, and ripping down bulletin boards. And both of those people get the same rewards. Both of them get to pass. Both of them get candy. And it's just the craziest system ever, which is why I have some controversies with the whole gentle parenting movement. I know that there's some people that promise like there are consequences. It's not just a free for all. But a lot of the ways that I've seen it is they're super against consequences that they say aren't logical. But the problem is in life, sometimes the consequences aren't super logical. But when you're little and there's something that you want and that gets taken away, you start to associate, if I have certain behaviors, there's going to be certain things that are taken from me or certain unpleasant consequences that I have. And it's like, even with a lot of these parenting movements, they're like, no, I'm just going to talk to the kid until I'm blue in the face. And that's the same thing that's going wrong in schools. We're just eternally talking to these kids. And if anything, I've just noticed they learn to become more manipulative. They learn to say what adults want to hear, and then they go off on their merry way and get the same rewards. And so it just, again, becomes this vicious cycle.
Yeah, yeah. They really are used to getting talked to, and they know the words to say to get you to shut up. They're very good at that. And I think what's frustrating about that is half the time with gentle parenting, I hear it talked about as like, it's not that you don't give consequence, it's that the natural consequences are the consequence. But a lot of times, what I see is we're so scared of how detrimental that consequence will be that we start to like pad it and lighten it and sort of like tweak it a little because we love our kids too much. And I get that. Like that'll be hard for me. One of the reasons I did quit is because I'm a horrible consequence giver. I love teaching. I'm horrible at like giving kids consequences and following through. Um, but like that's something we have to think about is in life, if you say, well, screw everyone else, I'm just gonna drive my car as fast as I want, you're gonna hurt someone, and someone is going to get hurt badly, you're going to go to jail, your car is going to get taken, the consequences will be heinous for doing something horrible. So if the consequence as a little kid, sure, it's the end of their world that they don't get recess, and sure that that's detrimental to them long term to never have recess. But in reality, this consequences will be detrimental to them in the real world when they continue to be extreme. So I would rather a student not get resource recess and have to do their homework when they're 5 and learn very quickly, I hate this. I'm just going to get my homework done so I can have my recess because I'm going to explode if I don't. Then down the road, they have all their consequences padded and tweaked, and then they get to something extreme, and the consequence is so extreme it destroys their life. So it's, yeah, like as someone who will probably be an accidental gentle parent and who has realized as a teacher that I need to work on like being more firm and in my consequence giving, like we have to do it. If you love your kid, you have to be like real and upfront with them and not constantly talk and coddle. You have to get on their terms. And in their terms, it's what I want versus what I get. So if they do something bad and they don't get what they want, they're going to learn very quickly, well, I just won't do that thing. As opposed to down the line when it's too late. And suddenly you have people who are shocked that, they would get yelled at or they would get kicked out of a classroom for blowing air up someone's butt. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the hard thing is I always talk about this on the channel, but it's just like the reality of the pendulum swing. I think what people miss sometimes is you don't have to choose one side or the other. You can take the best of both worlds. So I think in our modern parenting, we're so big on like love and validating feelings and empathy. And maybe in former years, there was a little bit less communication and talking. Maybe some of the consequences were maybe sometimes too harsh. And so what I always try to encourage is like come to the middle and take the best of both worlds. You do need to have serious consequences for serious behavior, but you can also do that with love and compassion and empathy. And I think sometimes the time to talk is after the consequence has been administered and the kid's crying like, oh, I'm so sad, I don't have recess, or you took away, my Nintendo or whatever it is. Then you can talk to them and explain the reason that this consequence hurts is because this behavior that you did was harmful. And the reason that we're doing this is because we love you and care about you and want your future to be great. But I think without some of the natural pain of real consequences, all the words don't tend to mean anything. And kids don't even have the ability to gel the concept in their mind that bad behavior equals bad consequences. And so I'm also kind of curious in your school. I know the last time we talked, you said your building was better, than some at kind of having some kinds of consequences and kind of trying to protect the teachers. Did that stay the same this school year, or how did that work out?
yeah, so I still really appreciate my admin. I think, the way that my mentor teacher kind of described it is education is a house on fire, but we haven't given up using the hose yet. We haven't just like gotten out, but they're starting to pinch the water. So we have ISS. Generally speaking, if I sent a kid down to my office, they would not be coming back. Or if they did, they would look very sheepish and ashamed of themselves, and I might even get an apology out of them. There were times when one of our admin would walk a kid up and he'd kind of shuffle in and he'd be like, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And admin and me would like share a nod, and then he wouldn't do it again. So really appreciate my admin on that, but that will be changing most likely this year because of our budget cuts. So in Minnesota, I'm not politically savvy, so I'm vague on the details, but they cut some of our funding in Minnesota for education. And a lot of the districts are trying to figure out what to do. Rural districts were hit really hard with this. So all of the policies have probably an increased negative effect on rural districts because they targeted our busing. And for a rural district, our busing is quite large compared to a like inner city district. We're going miles and miles and spending so much on diesel. And, with that comes this sort of snowballing where we can't afford to get better buses. So they break down a lot. Our roads are quite harsh on the busing that we have. Kids live horribly spread out. So our funding we've already been devastated by previous years. But this year's cuts and what they chose to target completely is decimating rural schools. It's so terrible for us. And so one of the things our district did is they told us, well, we're going to try and cut admin and not teachers. And they said that, to try and soothe teachers and look good. But what they did is they went for the admin who are most effective in the middle school, which is really frustrating because I'd say in the middle school is when you need probably the most support because they're the most impulsive and we're dealing with the most behavioral issues. And we have this incredible admin who was hired specifically because she could come in and clean up the school. To my understanding, I was not here at the time, but our middle school was a really rough place. Lots of getting beat up, lots of fights, very dangerous. And they hired her on and they said, can you come in and clean up our school? And she did just that. That woman is the backbone of the entire school. Like the kids, if they hear the jingle of keys, they're like, oh, she's coming. And they sit up straight. She ran our activities. She ran the school. She was probably there from 7:30 in the morning to 7:30 at night on a good night. Always there, always present. Kids respected her. Incredible admin. And they cut her. They realized that they don't pay her enough where someone would come in and replace what she did. And so they just decided to cut her position because it looked good. They could say, well, we cut admin, not teachers. But they completely just cut the legs off our school. And if you talk to any teacher in our school now, they're convinced that they're toast. So now she was kind of head of discipline. And so now they're trying to figure out what to do with the 800 or so, well, maybe that's an overestimate, maybe more like 600 or so students that she handled for discipline. Where are those students going to go? And how is discipline going to happen now? So quite literally, to expose my mentor teacher a little bit, she said, if you're going, now's the time, get out now, because we're doomed. They just cut the water off. The house is on fire. If you can go, go. That's how bad it is for us that they cut her position. And it's specifically her. She is literally the superstar that kept us going. And they couldn't replace her, so they're just not going to.
So that's really a bummer that they cut her position. And I'm just kind of curious. I know we touched a little bit on parenting, but have you found parents to be like helpful when you're reaching out for support?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I have been really blessed that anytime I've had a student who was in a tough spot, who like got hurt, when I've called, they've been super understanding, which I honestly did not expect. The tone was set really badly for me at the beginning of the year. That story I told last time where there was that parent who was yelling and threatening and finger in my face. That was kind of reinforced afterwards by being hung up on parents or being accused of like favoriting bullies and things like that, because of just the complex situations of the classroom. It really set the tone where I was fearful of parents and I would just make myself sick. Like I would have to have the garbage can ready just in case whenever I called a parent, I would be shaking. As a believer, I was literally like praying before phone calls. Which, it's probably good in general, but so it was really tough. And I did have some very interesting parents. I had a parent whose child was destroying items in my room and then hiding them. And my funding's not great. I can't afford for them to do that. And so when I called, the parent basically said, oh yeah, I did the same thing in school. Isn't that so cute? And I was like, no, it's not. Don't why are you encouraging that? And I was like, oh, they just take after me. If you make class interesting, they won't do that. So dismissive, a little bit rude and catty, and clearly not respecting. I mean, the great privilege it is to have a fully functioning art studio available for your kid and an art teacher who's willing to teach you. Because if you want that in 10 years, it's going to be like $1,000. So that sort of thing. But I also had a parent whose kid snuck out of my classroom. And I saw him do it. I watched him sneak out and come back in. And so I called and I just said, hey, I watched your child sneak out of my classroom. Please, I've talked with them, but please talk with them as well because it's a safety issue. Like they can't just leave without me knowing. And that parent, within an hour, while I was teaching in the classroom, called me 7 times. Um, and I still, like, I tried to call them back at the end of the day a couple times. I never got a hold of them. But in an hour, they called me 7 times to complain about how, like, I was targeting their child. So we've had just some really absurd things where parents are very sensitive to their kid being in trouble. And I that's one thing I worry about for me myself because I think it's probably a pride issue. I think there's you take it personally when your kid does something wrong and you feel embarrassed. And I'm right up front as a teacher. If your kid is horribly mean, yes, I am judging you because your kid just doesn't turn out that way by like magic. But if your kid's occasionally naughty, they're a kid. Like, I'm not assuming anything. You're like, I'm not a parent. I imagine it's really hard to parent. But it seems like a lot of parents are so defensive that even when you can back it up with receipts, the parents will gaslight you about what their own kid is doing. I had a parent where I contacted them and said like, "Hey, your child was combative." They immediately started arguing with me because I used the word combative, and their child is not combative. I was like, "Let me pull out the I'm gonna mess up this word thesaurus. Let's look through it. Here's aggravating, aggressive, disruptive. What word should we use? Let's go through and find one." So,
Yeah, I noticed that that was a huge problem too when I was teaching. And even going way back to 2013, I remember discovering Class Dojo and thinking, this is going to change my life. But literally, I would get parents complaining to admin that Class Dojo was too negative because I was taking away points and it was in the red. And I was thinking, again, with this correlation of you should be asking, what did your kid do to lose the points? Not getting mad at me for actually documenting what the kid did. And that's just another strange thing that is going on in society today. I know that some people would call it toxic positivity. I don't know what that correlation is to parenting, but it's this idea that you cannot say anything negative and speak the truth. And I remember even having an admin blew my mind. He said that parent teacher conferences aren't the time to be sharing anything negative. And I'm thinking, this is kind of the main time of year where parents are taking time off of work if they come to find out how is their kid really doing. And we're being told that this is not the time to be sharing negative things. And so it's again with that weird pendulum swing. Like I get the value of looking for the positive and trying to sandwich negative things like, the Oreo cookie method, with the tough things. But I just think we've just swung to this weird alternative universe where we're just not allowed to say what is true. And so it makes it really impossible to be a teacher.
yeah. Well, I remember in one of my classes for training on teaching, they recommended that we don't use a red pen or marker because that can create too much negativity and instigate like an anxiety reaction from the students, and then your feedback will not be helpful. Um, I'm sorry, but like if it comes down to what color marker you're using, your kid's gonna get bowled over in the real world. They're gonna get out there and they're gonna get squished flat as a pancake by the weight of reality. Like I understand that we love our kids and we want to take care of them. And when you do not expect people to take care of your kids to that degree and they do, it's a blessing, it's grace, it's a gift, it's wonderful. But when the expectation becomes that we accommodate every kid to this level, it's kind of pathetic. Like yeah, like and to me it really comes down to this idea of grace versus expectation. As someone who's gluten free, I do not walk through every door and expect everyone to have gluten free stuff available. When people do it, I feel loved and appreciated, and I love it when it happens, but it's not something I'm going to expect from every person in the world. And that way I'm never miserable or disappointed, and I get a lot of joy in my life from people who do that for me. It's the same thing with these sorts of things. Like teachers want to love and care for your children, and they want to accommodate them, and they will when they can. But when you're literally setting rules about what color pencil you can grade something in, I mean, that's not actually helpful. You're just creating a more controlled and anxious child because they have no exposure to discomfort.
That is such a great point. And it kind of reminds me of the recent controversy. It kind of came and went because a school district in California was going to go full fledged with the whole grading for equity thing. And it's just like basically, I wish I had the exact details in front of me, but I think a 21% out of 100 was going to be passing. And it was just a bunch of insane, ridiculous things. No homework, no attendance is counted. And truth be told, that's already what they're doing in the Midwest where I was working. But people freaked out so bad when they saw it in writing that the district kind of had to backpedal. But it's this same mentality that any kind of discomfort that a kid might feel, any time that they don't meet a standard, that somehow that's oppressive or toxic, and it's just the craziest thing in the whole world.
Yeah, well, and like you said, they do it in the name of equity, but I can't like that's so inequitable. Like it almost seems intentionally vicious to me because the kids who are set up for success by their parents are going to go, "No, you will get that A. I will make you get that A. I will set up you in life to have that A and be literate and competent." And the parents who can do that are going to be more present. They're probably going to be a little bit wealthier because they have more time. They're probably successful themselves, so they understand that success. So what you're just doing is creating this huge disparity between the parents who are able and present to push their kids because the school won't do it versus the parents who would rely on the school to create excellence in their students. And so what you're just doing is creating a higher kind of elite small group versus the masses, which are then let to slide and fail. And it just like it almost feels nefarious, and that's tinfoil hatty, but it just kind of baffles me that we're not looking at this and seeing that like if we're trying to take the place of parents, we're being horrible parents. So either schools are not parents and parents need to step up, or if a school is going to take on the role of a parent, we need to be a much tougher parent for these kids.
I 100% agree. I love the phrase, the soft bigotry of low expectations, because that's exactly what it is. Because these private schools that are elite, a lot of times they don't have all of the technology, they don't have all the ridiculous trends. Their schooling looks much more like a classical education from back in the day. They're reading the great classic works that are thick, and they're preparing them for things like the SAT. They're getting SAT prep, they're hiring tutors because they have the concept that there is some kind of bar and my child has to actually meet the bar. Whereas what's happening in a lot of poor districts or, districts with a lot of students of color, they're basically saying, let's pretend like bars and standards don't exist. In fact, let's delete them completely. And essentially, they're saying that minimal effort, not having a basic standard of math, reading, and writing, and science and social studies, that none of that matters anyway, that basically the kid can show up or not, kind of try or not, and they're going to be congratulated and celebrated for doing absolutely nothing. And that's to say nothing about the behavioral issues. I still remember this professional development meeting we had years ago, and there was an author of this major book. I think the book might have been called Push Out: The Criminalization of Black Girls. But I remember the person on stage saying something about how Black girls are misunderstood if they cuss you out, that we just need to understand them and we need to not take it personally, and really, really insane things. And I was thinking like that's offensive to me as a Black woman, that the standards are so low for Black females of any age that it's just okay to curse somebody out. And instead of setting standards and saying this kind of behavior is not going to be acceptable in a corporate place of business, for example, instead of truly setting them up for success with love, with empathy, with understanding, but reality, they're just saying, no, remove the standards. And so I think that that is entrenching a permanent underclass forever, because a lot of these students, without even the most basic work ethic, to be able to show up on time, to be respectful to the person in charge, even if they don't like them, to be able to meet basic deadlines. I mean, these are the bare minimum standards to even have a fast food job. There's just such basic things, requirements that have to be met. And we just have all of these kids now. And it's leaking over into suburban districts too, some of these mentalities and some of these silly policies. But it's just there's so many kids out there that are completely unprepared for the real world. And I think a crisis is coming in the next decade. And so that'll be my tinfoil hat too.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because so my area is highly Native American populations. And I know it's a little touchy on that phrase. I'm using Native American because that's what our Indian education offices said is the preferred term right now. So I know that it can be touchy, doing my best. But we had a like a professional development. It was both helpful and kind of frustrating because on the one hand, they gave us fantastic advice. They said, "Hey, in this population, it is like family is valued. So if you can connect to the family and you have their trust, like they'll do things for you. They'll work with you." And when I that changed a lot of the way I taught, it helped me, and I immediately had a much more positive interaction with a lot of the Native students who were struggling because I was able to connect, like, hey, I know your brother, I know your sister. I had them this year, I know your mom, or, like building the family connection worked. But at the same time, in the same, lesson that they gave us, they were saying, so if that student throws a chair at you, it's because they have historical trauma and you should just let it go. And I was like I want to teach to their issues, and I want their values, and I want to respect that trauma. But that even unselfishly, they could hit someone else with that chair. That chair is a weapon at that moment that they've used against the whole room. Um i even if I would let that go because I understand, or I like want to work with them, what about the other students in the room who got a chair thrown at them? Like, we're almost like, again, that for that student, they're going to grow up and they're going to keep throwing chairs if everyone does that, and then they're going to get to their job and someone's going to go, no, I'm going to press charges against you because you threw a chair. If I, as someone who understands and cares for them and wants a relationship with them and to help them early on, teach them you can't throw a chair, but you can walk into the bathroom and you can just scream. Or you can't throw a chair, but you can, like write out on a paper how you feel. And I address the behavior of the chair, then someday they're not going to lose their job. Someday they're going to succeed. But if we're in the name of kind of empathy and historical trauma response teaching, we're almost creating this issue with these students where they will never succeed because rather than working on better coping skills, we're being pushed to just ignore it. Um, and that to me was super distressing to hear because at the same time, they had some great advice for how to connect to that community and it was going well. It was wonderful. But at the same time, I'm listening to this like, we can't do that. Like, that's so unfair to them. That's terrible to undermine them in that way. Um, like, we really need to be more intentional on how we teach like trauma informed stuff and things like that. And it involves having consequences because we care and because we don't want them to be harmed by that stuff later on.
Absolutely. I'm so in favor of the idea of empathy married to accountability. I think it's the
Mhm.
perfect combination because, I think it's perfectly valid to understand why somebody might be behaving the way they're behaving. But like you said, it's actually unloving to stop there and to then not equip them and help them and work with them to be able to behave in a way that will create success in the future. And so, kind of going along with that, if you had a magic wand and you could just change anything in education right now, is there anything in particular that you would change?
Oh, that's so hard. I always like come up with solutions and I'm like, well, maybe that wouldn't work. Um, But I guess maybe the thing that I would change is the perspective of education. If there was a way to see education as a privilege again, I think that would be huge for the way we treat it. Um, because, like, what I see most of all is that students, we're on our hands and knees begging parents to send their students. We're begging students to show up. We're begging them to learn how to read and begging them to learn how to write. They don't feel like they have to. They To them, this is a bother that they have to jump through this hoop because, oh, they're trying to make me do it. But there's a lack of understanding that there was a world where people were majority illiterate once and they had no opportunities and they were heavily controlled by people who could read and write, and just all the consequences of living in a majority uneducated population that they have never had to learn what that is like. they don't know what they're missing if they don't learn how to read or write. And they're not going to know till it's too late, until it's hard to find someone to teach you, until it's expensive, until by the ignorance of not being educated, they lose something important. And so I'd rather we didn't have to hit up against that wall where a ton of people realize what they lost. I'd rather that there was just this magic switch where we realize the power that comes with having the luxury of being educated. Um, and specifically the luxury of having it done for free, regardless of how you feel about public schools. I mean, that is free education. There's free tools there that you can then use to build the way you want. Even if you don't agree with a single thing your history teacher teaches you, you have the ability to read. You can go out and get the books you want to read and learn what you want to learn. And even if you hated math, hey, you can calculate how much your budget is and you can make sure you're not overspending and going into debt. There's so much empowerment with education, especially in things like art, where that's a luxury. Art is a luxury, 100%. But it is so valuable for our mental growth and learning and development. Social emotional, it creates these criticizing and critiquing skills, helps us give and receive feedback as a normal function, helps with creative problem solving. It helps to grow different areas of our brain than like math and reading. Those things are so important to a well-rounded person, but they're this huge luxury that you don't have to have. That could be taken from you someday and you would, be worse off without it. But right now it's for you free. We're begging you to take it and you just don't care. So creating a value for education and a huge respect for what you have, I think would create a lot of discipline for students, because parents would understand the luxury that they're taking advantage of if they misbehave. And I think students would take it more serious and they'd be more involved in the learning process, which hopefully if they're invested because they know it's important, that would then develop into them kind of giving feedback into their learning, and learning would become more cooperative rather than like kind of bashing people on the head, like, please read, learn how to read. So that's
Yeah.
what I would do.
Yeah, I agree with you 1,000,000%. And I just think that so much of the social justice conversation is misapplied, because I think the true equalizer with social justice is an excellent education. And I just wish so much that we could get parents to really believe that, because that was just one of my biggest struggles as a teacher, was trying to convince parents, like, please make your kid do their homework. Please make them turn in their assignments. And I know it's a controversial hot take, but there's so many people from other countries that come into America and succeed because their parents drilled into their mind, you must do your work, you must be polite and respectful, you must take advantage of this education. And I agree 100%. So many people that have just grown up having it and expecting it, they just don't see it as something worthwhile, and they treat it terribly, as a result of not really valuing education. So I could talk about that for hours. I agree with you so much. And I'm kind of curious too, like, what would you tell a teacher that has been in your position and is really wondering if it's worth it to stick with education with everything you've seen? What would you tell them?
It's a tough one. So my thesis I did on women leaving education, and what I kind of delved down deep and found is that like a lot of education appeals to women as a demographic. We believe that it'll fit a lot of the values we have, such as like working with people, doing moral, ethical work, having flexibility, being accommodating to family. And we're finding that those things are not true. So the lesson that I learned when I looked at my thesis and I looked at how, despite no longer having this like socioeconomic funnel into teaching, women still want to be teachers. What I really walked away with is um, like we think that it'll still be something for us that fits with us, and then we're finding that it's not. And when it comes down to choosing between investing in our family or investing in everyone else's children, we're picking our family because we have more ability and more value we can invest into ours than into everyone else's kids at this time. So for young women like me, I would say you need to evaluate, can you like your family and your care for your husband, your children, if that's your goal in life, needs to come first. And if your teaching job gives you the flexibility, if you walk home with enough energy to still love your kids the way you need to love them, if you can still be a good partner to your spouse, as a teacher, it is okay to stay. Like, if you love your job and you feel healthy in it, do it. But do not for a moment trade your children, your spouse's well-being for other people's children. Because the effect you want to have with them, you can't have. You will forever be chasing the dream of saving other people's children while your own are sitting there watching you get physically ill, exhausted, be too impatient for them. So you need to put on your breathing mask before you put on the person's next to you, so to speak. So I'd say that for people in my situation, from what I've learned, you have to make the choice for you and your family. For teachers who are uncertain, you really just got to look to the future. Can you hang your hat on where education is going? For me, I saw the noose getting tighter and tighter. My budget was getting cut. Parents were getting worse. Like, behaviors are getting more extreme. I was getting sicker every year, physically and mentally. Could I live the rest of my life with that? And because I couldn't, I left early. And I have the ability to leave while other teachers do not. So if you're just in general, for teachers who are kind of like me, you have to look 5 years ahead. If you think you're going to be miserable, go before your life is dependent on your career. You can find something else, you can adapt. There's opportunities out there, especially for disciplined, educated people. Um, but you have to, in the end, make the choice for you and your family and your future over the rest of the population, because what good are you to these students if you're burned out and dragging yourself through it miserably anyway? So yeah.
Wonderful, Kate. Well, this has been a great conversation. I just resonate so much with everything you've said and your experiences. And for the audience, thank you so much for watching. If you ever want to interview with me, you can email me at teachertherapytrish@gmail.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a comment, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.